Hi, I'm here with the three authors of the Enigma of Grief and the Sublime. Robert Arnold Johnson, Bob, who's in the center of your picture, Susan Eileen Pickett, and Mark Brown. Um, when this job came in, I was so fascinated by the title. It was like the enigma of grief and the sublime was just a coming together of ideas that had never quite occurred to me. So, Bob, if you could give an overview of what that means, basically, and how you came to put this together and bring your colleagues in on it.
The project had its inception uh, in my preparation for giving a talk at the Fred Hutchinson Cancer Center in Seattle. Having been invited by a friend and colleague there, a professor of surgery at the University of Washington, who had, on the spur of the moment one day, when we were traveling together, said, "Hey, I'd like you to give a talk at the Fred Hutch at our melanoma conference this coming spring, and you can choose any topic you like." So, in thinking about this and the nature of the conference, which was a gathering of not only professionals treating patients with melanoma, but patients with melanoma and family members of patients with melanoma, all in the same auditorium. So it was an opportunity to address colleagues in medicine at the very same time I was addressing the general public. Early on, I began to incorporate some of what would later become the pillars of the book. First and foremost is the idea that grief is an adaptive feeling, meaning that it helps, not hinders the person bearing the mourning, the person who has suffered the loss that triggered it. That's not my idea originally, but it was one I was quite familiar with by that time. And it was not receiving enough general attention, even in the psychiatric world, in my opinion. So I made that an important feature. A second thing was, well, once identified, so what? How does it matter in the lives of people in their everyday encounters with persons who are mourning, and also for professionals providing psychotherapy? Still a third pillar that I incorporated was an idea I had learned much more recently in my life, namely a philosophical conception of the word enigma. I wanted to do that because I could feel my mind headed toward a conception of grief that was going to require a philosophical base somehow. It couldn't be simply free floating, you might say. And the concept of enigma, which is that of a mental surprise that is not a problem. A problem is a mental surprise that has a solution. Once the solution is found, it vanishes. Enigma is a state of mind that further reflection about its center, its topic, deepens the character of you might say, the surprise, makes it ever more rich rather than causing it to vanish. And I knew that that was going to be important to the conception of grief that I would come to. The final pillar of the theme, namely that the sublime is the feeling of grief, what does grief feel like? And the
Hmm.
answer is it feels sublime. I hadn't quite nailed by the time of the talk, which was in May 2016. But I did get so far as to call it beauty.
Hmm.
That beauty and grief were united, and the uniting feature of them was enigmatic. Uh, that loss itself is enigmatic, and who the person is bearing the loss is a matter of enigma as well. So I had everything in place, you might say, except for the final uh, consolidation of the word beauty into sublime. Now,
One question. When you say sublime, the feeling of grief is sublime. Um, could you clarify? That doesn't mean it feels good. Um, how would you distinguish? I'm just wondering, would most people feel that their grief is sublime? What does that mean exactly?
it does mean that it feels good. In fact,
Oh,
you might say a pinnacle of what a good feeling can be. The very apex of good
hmm.
feeling is what I mean. No, we're going for it here. What you're automatically thinking of as grief, we think of as defenses that
Hmm.
obscure grief. And if there's time this morning, we can talk a little bit more about that. But the distressing feelings of loss are not adaptive. That is, they're not helpful to the person bearing them. If anything, they perpetuate the wound of the person who's bearing the loss. Whereas the feeling of grief has the opposite effect. It has a healing effect on that very wound. So, uh,
So, in other words, tr true grief, real grief is progressive. It doesn't mean wallowing in pain.
that's correct. That's correct. It leads toward a state of acceptance.
Mhm.
By acceptance, I would mean that, let's say the loss of a person, a loved person, that has been the trigger for the wound of loss. Uh, the state of acceptance is having recurring images of that person and perhaps your interactions with them that produce pleasure, produce a smile.
Hmm.
And, you know, often a perfect example for those of us old enough to have been subjected to this, the loss of our mother, for, just as a case in point. I think of her often, and it's with considerable pleasure.
Hmm.
That is what we mean by this state of acceptance. And the feeling of grief is a propellant toward that
Hmm.
acceptance point.
Um, okay, could you say a little bit about your first piece in the book, which is Art and the Evocation of Natural Grief? This book is done in interior full color, and you have a number of striking artworks throughout. Um, so could you make that connection for us? What is the connection of art and natural, what you're calling natural grief?
Well, we made, at this point, again, in preparation for this talk in Seattle, Susan was my only colleague at that point. I recruited her to help us together find a way of provoking the feeling of the sublime. Because in essence, we have to appeal to the memory of people who have suffered loss, present them with an example of feeling the sublime, and then ask, can you locate this feeling in your response to the loss you've suffered? And so to do that, we made use of works of art that for us uh, struck us as evocative for a sublime experience. So both musical, poetic, and visual art were recruited into that talk I gave in Seattle. And many of those same pieces survived into the book, which was a later state in the evolution of this whole theme. Uh,
Right. And would you say that this is part of the power of any great artwork that it induces an enigmatic feeling?
I would. I would. In fact, I
All
would.
righty.
I don't believe a work of art can be called great that doesn't do that.
Right. Yeah, I'm afraid I have the common law interpretation of art is that if I could do it, it's not art. I'm looking for a bigger experience than what I would recognize. Um, Mark, your piece in the book is entitled Evocation of Sublime Sadness, Jazz and Popular Music. Could you summarize all your words in the book into a few words here?
Sure. Um, I guess I go back to when Bob approached me and explained this concept. And as a therapist for 40 plus years and a performing musician for 50 plus years, it struck something in me as a unifying concept, particularly in my experience of clients in grief. Um, and so what he asked me to do was to choose some songs that might facilitate that kind of movement. And I was intrigued by the idea. And didn't know exactly what would come out of this project for me, but I was able to find um, a handful of songs that I felt like I need to explain. There were different levels that those songs worked on. Um,
Mhm.
and I was saying right before we had this conversation that it put me back to my days as a seminarian, reading Paul Tillich and his distinction between signs and symbols. And he said, a sign points to something, a symbol allows the viewer to participate in the reality and the power of whatever it is it's signifying. And so that's what I attempted to do on a lyrical content level. I picked songs that, in one way or another, illustrated um, aspects of grief. But on a deeper level, the music itself was a symbol that allowed the person theoretically to participate and to move toward the sublime, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Is there any um could you name any particular well-known jazz musician who um evokes that sublimity of grief?
Well, one of the songs pieces that I chose was an instrumental that I think is one of the finest ensemble jazz pieces that I've ever heard, and it's Jim Hall, the guitarist, who it got these people together. But Chet Baker was playing the trumpet on this tune, and it evokes that feeling for me. His solo is so sad and yet transporting at the same time that's the best example that I have. And every solo on there, Paul Desmond and Roland Hanna, all of them do this amazing job of coming together and sort of unifying that experience for me.
Huh. Would you say, this may be very judgmental, but would you say that one thing that defines pop music is that it evades deeper levels of feeling? Or is that unfair?
Well, I think that it's unfair in that it lumps together things that you might call pop music that are really, I think, extraordinary and participate in that feeling or that reality. And there's a bunch of stuff that's superficial uh, and probably, to use your word, evades.
Right, right. Um, Susan, you did a piece for the book, Musical Structure and Sublime Sadness. Now, as I understand, you were a performing musician for many years.
Over 50, yes.
Oh, well,
So,
you've probably not really stopped then.
well, I had to stop playing violin because of neck issues after 50 years of playing. But certainly my decades as a performer played heavily into the pieces that I helped Bob choose from the classical world. Um, and then when we got our final group of pieces, I asked myself, what is it about these pieces in terms of their structure that evokes the sublime?
Susan, may I make an interjection
Yes.
just for a minute? One of the striking things that Susan and I came across early on in preparing for that talk that I've mentioned several times is that we never disagreed. If one of us found a piece sublime at a certain point, it had evoked our sense of the sublime, the other agreed.
Yes.
So now go ahead.
So I studied each of the pieces in terms of what was their tempo, how fast or slow are they, how is the melodic aspect structured? Is it stepwise motion? Does it leap a lot? And what instruments are used? How loud or soft were they? And as I did that, I got a list that Bob then put into a graph form of what these pieces had in common. And it covers a huge variety of music, hundreds of years of music, and yet all these pieces had those things in common.
Huh. Um, in an earlier conversation, I brought up uh, Pachelbel's Canon in D,
Yes,
which became I first heard it long ago in the 70s, and it became insanely popular. Um, and still is, I guess. I
it
think
is.
it's been covered about 200 times. Um, what's your opinion of that particular piece of popular classical music? Does it achieve the sublime or?
It does at the beginning because it's a relatively inactive piece.
Huh.
But then as the piece progresses, the composer ornaments and amplifies. And so it goes from sublime to joyous.
Oh, it reminds me in strange way, some way, I guess because of its building structure of Bolero.
Oh,
Um,
yes, absolutely.
and and it sort of has a similar progression,
Yes,
slow and sadness and builds up to something
yeah.
um celebratory. Um, would any of you say that this is the real progress of grief from slow and sad to celebration?
Not exactly. uh, not exactly. The feeling of the sublime is celebratory enough. Not in the sense that you might say of uh, ecstasy. Um, the ecstatic has gone a bit too far. But Friedrich von Schiller, for example, who was one of the first to notice that the feeling of the sublime has what he used the word melancholy embedded within it. Uh, he also included the ecstatic dimension within the same concept. One way of thinking about this transition that Susan mentioned in the Pachelbel, and you've hinted at, Patrick, is to think of the last two movements of Beethoven's Ninth Symphony. The third movement, the Adagio movement, is natural grief.
Yes.
It is the sublime. And the fourth movement, the ecstatic, the ode to joy, is the move to ecstasy. It's okay, I think of the sublime as somehow a conjunction, a fusion of those two elements within.
Right,
And
right,
we make that point in the book. And I think it
right.
has just come up in Mark's commentary too. Uh,
Um, Mark, one question. Given that jazz is one of the less well understood musical forms, um, um, do you think that it's less well understood or less popular because it evokes deeper feelings than pop?
Um, what an interesting
that's a
question.
good question.
Uh, no, I wouldn't say that. I think that it is less well known because it's much more complex. Uh,
Oh, okay.
and uh, but within jazz, there is this uh, huge opportunity for expression in terms of improvisation that can lead us in that direction.
Oh, okay. Um, and Susan, is there any way in which you would any advice you have for people in listening to music? I mean, by which I mean classical music, um, with a different appreciation, with an enigmatic appreciation.
Yes. I think of the world as being bombarded by music of the background. Every
Hmm.
restaurant you go into, every elevator you go into, we're bombarded, and many of us tend to tune it out. So I'm asking the readers and the listeners of our book to sit down quietly and listen very carefully. That's why in the book I took a particular recording of a piece that we recommended, and I said at a certain moment in time, say 4 minutes, 3 seconds, something special happens. And I tell the reader what that is and to listen for it. So I'm asking for more critical listening, but certainly very careful, non-wallpaper listening.
Right.
If I can add, I think that in addition to careful listening, I think that there's a way that the listener uh, is benefited by being as open to different levels of themselves to hear this and to let it in at a deep level.
Right,
Yes.
right.
Yeah.
Um, in sum, any or all of you can answer this. What do you hope um, your book, The Enigma of Grief and the Sublime, adds to people's experience um, of grief and the sublime? You know, what ideas were you trying to introduce that may be new?
Well, the principle um, right at the center of the answer to that question has to be the idea of comfort, comfort for those
Hmm.
distressed by loss. And that is why I used in the beginning of my comments this morning the term adaptive. Grief, as we're conceiving of it here, again, I want to emphasize this idea is not original to us, but it's not emphasized enough. Um, Even in contemporary psychiatry and psychology, it's not emphasized enough. Uh, we wanted to re-emphasize the idea that we have within us, via evolution, we have within us a mechanism for comfort. And
Hmm.
but we have to be patient with it. We have to, understanding that it's there will help it come forward. Uh,
Huh, that's interesting.
And if I can add, I think that the in my work as a therapist over decades, the experience of grief is quite individual and it can look and feel differently depending on the person and their history and so forth. But there's one of the beautiful things about the concept, I think, is that there's as I said before, there's a unifying power to the concept, and that just to sort of piggyback on what Bob said, I think that that is it's in all of us in potential.
Hmm.
We have the potential to be able to access that.
Right. Susan, do you have any concluding remark?
No, I think I've said what I needed to say.
Okay, great. Well, thanks very much. This is an extraordinary book, and it's illuminating to have you um, add some verbal, not decoration, exploration of what's in it. So, thanks very much.
Thank
Thank you,
you.
Thank you,
Patrick.
Patrick.